Well, hello. Hope you're doing well. Thank you so much for joining us for this online message this weekend at Deep Rivers Church. As always, some of you are out of town, and if you're watching this, thank you for staying connected with us. Hope you're having a great time. We'll see you soon. And as always, if you're not feeling well, hopefully you bounce back quick, and we'll see you again in person real quick. When it comes to things going on the calendar, Monday night, tomorrow night, 7 o'clock is an equip class. Nicole is leading on how to pray more effectively. So prayer is more than just, giving a laundry list of things to God that you want to see him do. So she's walking a class through that for the next 4 Monday nights. Wednesday is a fifth Wednesday, and it also happens to be the last prayer house before the election. So this coming Wednesday, we'll be doing a fifth Wednesday prayer house praying for our country. Okay, so that's certainly on a lot of people's hearts and a lot of people's minds. So come join us Wednesday night, 7 o'clock, to pray for our country. We start at 7 and we'll be done at 8. Friday morning is the men's Bible study, if that works for your schedule. Come join us next month in November on a Thursday night, November 7th. We're going to have an art night. So if you like to do artistic things, come to the building. People are just going to come and enjoy doing some art things together. The 16th, November 16th is a Saturday. We're going to have a fall walk in the woods, followed by a chili lunch right here at the church. So check the email for some details on that. All right. So when, the Bible has a 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. So we tend to think when you hear about 3 Johns, you might think of 1st, 2nd, and 3rd John. Well, I want to share 3 other people named John who all had something in common. John Wycliffe, John Huss, and John Brown. What did these 3 gentlemen all have in common? They were all believers, outspoken Christian believers. All 3 of them were executed. They were executed because of what they believed and how they lived out their life. John Wycliffe and John Huss, a long time ago, kind of certain around themes, meanings around the Bible and things like that. John Brown was executed for his abolitionist beliefs and actions, trying to bring an end to slavery. So there were believers who died for their faith. They were willing to stand up for something, and they paid an ultimate cost. And unfortunately, throughout the last 2,000 years, there's been a lot of people that have been killed for their faith because they were willing to stand up for it. There is a part of us, when we look at the turmoil and turbulence of the world, there's a part of us that kind of wants to run away. There's a part of us who kind of wants to go off to the woods and just kind of get away from it all. Not just for a weekend, but forever. More and more people kind of secluding themselves, getting off the grid. But as believers, we are told to be salt and light and to stand for the truth. The religion that God finds as pure and flawless is protecting the widow and the orphan. It's fighting for other people. So again, I'll read Matthew 5. Jesus said, "You are the salt of the earth. You are the light of the world. A town built on a hill cannot be hidden. Neither do people light a lamp and put it under a bowl. Instead, they put it on a stand, and it gives its light to everyone in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, that they may see your good deeds and glorify your Father in heaven." We're saved for a purpose. We're saved to show and reflect God's character, his light, but we're also saved for the purpose of being used by him. And again, salt preserves. Salt is also a catalyst. I know we've talked about that in the past. And salt and light brings truth. Light brings life. And some and many have died because of this, because they were willing to be a light, and even if there was a cost to it. So I don't think anybody's going to argue about that. Okay, we're supposed to live our life salt and light, be out there, be missional. We've talked about all those things. But what about these 2 verses? These 2 verses are going to throw a monkey wrench into this whole conversation. 1 Thessalonians 4, 11 through 12 says this: "Make it your ambition to lead a quiet life. You should mind your own business and work with your hands, just as we told you, so that your daily life may win the respect of outsiders, and so that you will not be dependent on anyone. Well, you think that's just one verse. Well, actually, it's found twice. 1 Timothy 2, 1 through 2. I urge you that petitions, prayers, intercession, and thanksgiving be made for all people, for kings and all those in authority, that we may live peaceful and quiet lives in all godliness and holiness. This week we wrap up our sermon series on living our lives with a sense of urgency and making sure that our priorities are in a good place where God desires our priorities to be. So this is the last sermon, and it's on the priority of living a quiet life. It needs to be a priority for us as followers of Jesus to live a quiet life. So you see the problem. How can we be salt and light and live a quiet and peaceful life at the same time? It almost seems like salt and light and a peaceful life almost go like this. How can we be outspoken about our faith? How can we take the gospel to go teach and baptize, the Great Commission? How can we do that and live a quiet life at the same time? How do those two things mesh together as opposed to just conflict with one another? The ironic thing is that Paul, who wrote these two verses, make it your ambition to lead a quiet life, and who also wrote that we may live peaceful and quiet lives, also wrote 4 epistles known as the prison epistles. Why are they known as the prison epistles? Because he wrote them while he was in prison. He wasn't in prison because he wasn't paying his taxes. All right? He was in prison because he was causing a disturbance. He was vocal enough about the gospel that it got him in trouble. So again, how do we reconcile these two thoughts? Being salt and light, going, teaching, baptizing, being missional. How do we balance that out with this injunction, this idea of leading a quiet and peaceful life? Let me take a context time out a little bit just to kind of fill in the picture, to tell you a little bit more about the times that this was written in a quiet life, right? This was written to those under persecution, where a mere confession was being salt and light. So I think what Paul's saying is, don't hide your light. Jesus tells us don't hide your light, but he's also telling us be smart. Our situation is telling them to be smart. Don't hide, but let's be smart about this too. Don't be a rebel. All right. Our situation is a bit different. Our being salt and light takes some action on our part. Okay. So we still live in a largely, and shocking as it is, might be, we still live in a Christianized world in a lot of ways. But for them, claiming Christ was something that the mere confession put them in harm's way. So I think there's something to be said for Paul is saying, hey, live a quiet life. It's okay to be under the radar at times. Don't bring more attention to yourself. That's my take on it. The second one is work with your hands. The challenge to work with our hands. Again, the culture of the time that work was undignified, and in fact it was despised. But here Paul is saying that work is good. Think about Jesus as a carpenter, the disciples are fishermen, Paul is a tent maker. So he's reaffirming this idea that work is not undignified, it's not to be despised, but it's okay, it's a good thing to work. And another part of this equation, which you might not be aware of, is some of the folks here might have just been sitting around waiting for Jesus to return. He said he was coming back, and they thought that was going to be in weeks, months, years, so why should they bother to work? So it's a kind of a challenge not to be lazy or not to be passive. And this last line, just for further context, pray for leaders. Oftentimes Christians were accused of undermining the government. They held an allegiance to Jesus more than Caesar. And I think this is another Paul's way of saying pray for your leaders. Recognize and honor the government. Pray for them, but not to them. Okay, again, their leaders were very different than ours. So pray for the leaders. Don't pray to the emperor. Pray for him. All right, so that's just a little bit more context to help fill it in. Back to our big problem. How can we be salt and light and also at the same time live a quiet and peaceful life? We have 5 questions that we'll explore that kind of help us get some resolution to this. Question number 1 is a quiet life. How do you define life? All right, bear with me. How do you define life? Is life the state of your circumstances or the state of your heart? How do you define what your life is? Is it just your circumstances, or is it your perception of them? It's the state of your heart, or maybe even I'll throw in the state of your mind, what you think and what you feel. Is that your life, or strictly just the circumstances? Bad circumstances. You can still have a rest in your heart, even if circumstances are bad. All right? So you can still have a peaceful, quiet, restful life and heart, even if circumstances are not great or bad or tragic, I'll say. Because of this, are you actively pursuing the presence of God and the rest it brings? That if we are people that intentionally pursue God's presence, where his presence is, there's going to be rest and peace and a quiet life. You have choices. We all have choices to make. Are you going to spend your time listening to talk radio or worship music? All right, and I'm not saying ignore the news. You can watch the news, but what do we focus on? What do we spend more time on? Unfortunately, we spend a lot more time the input from the world as opposed to input from God. So how are you actively pursuing God's presence? Because there's going to be the peace and the rest and by result, a quiet life. If we allow it, perceived expectations that other people have on us, so-called demands of life can fill our hearts and minds with a general state of unrest. That's the world today. A general state of unrest, a free-floating anxiety. People are anxious, but they don't know exactly why or what to pin it on. When we pursue God's presence in our life, we're going to be different. We're not going to have this general state of unrest. We're not going to be people with this anxiety that's just kind of floating around. It is possible to have an element of chaos and still have a quiet heart and a peaceful life. All right. So first question is, how do you define your life? Is it your circumstances or is it the state of your heart? Here's the second question. How do the distractions in life, our actions and our material stuff, complicate our lives? All right. There is a real danger of entertainment. It's the danger of filling the void with worldly pursuits. To lead a quiet life is to live and behave quietly, to live free from the disruption of optional commotion. You like that phrase? To lead a quiet life is to live and behave quietly, to live free from the disruption of optional commotion. Now, commotion is going to come, but how much of it are you inviting into your own life? The quiet life contradicts the modern attraction to entertainment and excitement. Our addiction to entertainment is damaging, both spiritually for us and culturally to the world. You see it played out in culture all around us, okay? People are always looking for that next thing. The lure of entertainment and escape seduces us into living for one thing, and that's the next thrill of the moment, the next fun thing that we can do. Even though these times are quickly over and then forgotten, there's this part of us that's fear of missing out. What's the next thing? I asked somebody last week how their weekend was, and it was not so good because it's just been so boring. Like if their life wasn't filled with some activity, it was boring to them. This leads most of us to ask this question in culture today: is it fun? Instead of asking, is it true? Is it right? Is it good or godly? Here's the bottom line. Can we be content with godly things? Can we be a people that are content with what God gives us and not trying to fill that emptiness with all kinds of other things, the commotion that we invite into our life? Here's the bonus too, is that a quiet life gives us more time and more attention listening to God. When we live a quiet life, we can listen to God and get to know him better. And I know we've mentioned the Amish community a few times, not that far away from us. There's some things I think that we need to admire about the Amish is that they've said no to a lot of the distractions of life. They are better able to enter into a quiet and peaceful life. Now, I'm not suggesting we all turn Amish, because there's other parts of that conversation, but there's something to be said for how do we invite commotion into our life, and can we be content with the godly things that he has given to us? Are we always wanting more, that emptiness that we're trying to fill with something else? Question number 3. What is the association between a quiet life and your relationships? Think about it. Is there a connection between living a quiet, peaceful life and our relationships? Now, Proverbs got a lot to say about relationships. Proverbs 15:18. A hot-tempered person stirs up conflict, but one who is patient calms a quarrel. 17:14. Starting a quarrel is like breaching a dam, so drop the matter before a dispute breaks out. Again, the importance of living in peaceful relationships. Proverbs 23. It is to one's honor to avoid strife, but every fool is quick to quarrel. I want you to think about it this way. You could have a life with great, utopian, idyllic circumstances. You could live on that desert island and have every wish, every desire fulfilled. Okay, you could live in this utopian state. And if you did, and your relationships were still a mess, if they were still stressful, full of conflict, contention, and fighting, would you be living a quiet and peaceful life? Every need, every desire is fulfilled, but your relationships are a complete mess, complete dysfunction, a lot of drama in your relationships. Would you say that's a quiet life? I think the answer is no. That the quietness of our life is not dependent on our circumstances, but impacted by our relationships. That's why Jesus says in Matthew 5:9, blessed are the peacemakers. It's important for us to live in ways that promote peace with other people. Here's the 4th question. What does it mean to mind your own business? We just read that. Where was it at? 1 Thessalonians 4:11. You should mind your own business. It sounds like something we'd say to our kids, but it's actually word for word coming from the gospel. What does it mean to mind your own business? Now, I got to admit, this is sort of a hard balance. There's a lot of nuance to this conversation. How are we to be salt and light to the world and focus on our life and our matters instead of meddling or prying into other people's lives? There's a balance there. This is an art. This is not a science. I found some quotes that maybe help us with this. There is a great difference between the Christian duty of putting the interest of others first and the busybody's compulsive itch to put other people right. Did you get that? There's a great difference between the duty we have of putting others' interests before our own and the busybody's compulsive itch to put other people right. We're supposed to be salt and light. We're supposed to put other needs before our own, but we're not here to fix everybody's problems, to correct everything that we see. Again, there's some nuance to this whole conversation. Another thought, this does not mean that we have no concern for others, but we need to avoid the idle triviality. How about that phrase? We need to avoid the idle triviality which makes us disturbers of the peace when we ought to lead a quiet life at home. Okay? And then the last thought is, some are eager to argue about whatever the topic of the day is, yet when it comes to sharing the gospel, they are shy and quiet. Again, for this point, for this question, I'll just go back to those 3 words: balance, nuance, and wisdom. Don't meddle in others' affairs or try to know everything better. There's something to be said for trying to curb our curiosity. Again, are we supposed to love people? Yes. Are we supposed to love people sacrificially? Yes. But again, this is an art. How do we do this? Do we have a curiosity that's not just healthy? Okay. Be single-minded about what God has given you to do. It's great to see the needs of others and to come alongside them. This is not what Paul is talking about. There's warning here. The warning here is because we all know how easy it is to get pulled into things that shouldn't be our concern. Sometimes, and I hope you don't mind me saying it kind of bluntly, sometimes we need to learn how to stay in our lane. Stay in our lane. Sometimes we invite drama, commotion into our life because while we care for people, we're not being too discerning or discerning enough on how to get involved. Not every occasion is an opportunity. Not every occasion that you're going to see is an opportunity to get involved. So here's the question. Again, I understand this is hard. But ask, is God prompting this involvement? Is God prompting this conversation? Or is this a curiosity that's just more fueled by my flesh than by the Spirit of God? So yes, we need to be ministers to people, but we also need to be aware and keep some healthy boundaries in place as well. The last question, I hope this last one kind of brings a little bit more clarity to it. Is there a difference between our public life and our private life? Our mission and our home? Is there a difference between how we live our lives publicly and our private life? We have a mission. We are to live missionally, but we also have a home. Let me give two examples that might help give them some clarity. The first one is this, the example of a missionary. A missionary, whether it's stateside or overseas, is going to enter into spiritual conflict. It might be with the witch doctor down the street. It doesn't have to be that extreme. But a missionary, people who minister, anybody, is going to enter into spiritual conflict. If that missionary who's in spiritual conflict is he's a representative of light pushing back dark, he's going to have conflict, but he could still be a person of peace. And he could still be a godly example. They could still be a godly example to everyone. It's their job, if you will, their public life will be one that might not really elicit a lot of peace from people, but they can still be a godly person and a godly example for everyone. The second example is a street preacher. Think about a street preacher who's preaching on a hostile college campus or a hostile street corner, the hostile culture. Yet that street preacher who's having people yell at him and argue at him, even if he's doing it well, okay, some people don't always do it so well, but even if a street preacher is doing it well, he's going to elicit a lot of negative responses. That person can still enjoy a peaceful and restful home. And I say still enjoy a peaceful and restful life. Now, when I say there's a difference between our public and private, the separation, I'm not talking about being a hypocrite. I'm not talking about saying one thing about your own life in public and then not having your private life match up to it. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about being a hypocrite or having a double standard. I'm saying that we can serve and do something publicly, but then still have a peace and rest at home. The question is, can our mission get messy, yet our relationship with family and friends be healthy? And I say yes. I think we can enter into mess, conflict, if you will, and still have relationships with family and friends to still have a life that is simple and quiet. The trouble can be and often is the unfortunate result of being salt and light. We don't look for it. Paul didn't look to go to prison, but that was the result of doing what he did. And again, it goes back to what Jesus said. Jesus said, they hated me, they're going to hate you too. So Jesus is telling us we're going to have lives of conflict. As much as we want to try to avoid it, shelter ourselves, again, maybe the Amish got something going on, but they might take it to an extreme where they really don't have the ability to be salt and light anymore. Jesus said we're going to have lives of conflict. So, Jesus, as we're talking about Jesus, let me ask you this question. Do you think Jesus lived a quiet and peaceful life? Yes or no? Did Jesus, in the totality of his life, live a quiet and peaceful life? Now, he certainly had situations and episodes where there was conflict, but I believe Jesus lived a quiet and peaceful life. I think the answer is yes. Was his heart in turmoil or rest? Was his heart in turmoil or was it in rest? Now, apart from the episode, the short crucifixion episode that we know about, where he experienced a lot of angst, I would say that Jesus' life was marked by rest, a quiet life. Jesus, the light of the world, he did have conflict, yes. Did Jesus have peace? Yes. How? Because oftentimes he had quiet and peaceful times with his Father. So we need to separate who we are in the grand scheme of who we are versus having episodes of conflict. To live a quiet and peaceful life, again, it goes back to the state of your heart. And I believe it's possible, regardless of what's going on in our lives, we could still have a quiet and peaceful life if we're pursuing God's presence. One more thing I just want to share before we wrap things up. There is an attraction of peace and tranquility. When we can enter into a quiet life living, there is an attraction to that. In fact, according to 1 Peter chapter 3, 1 through 4, a quiet spirit, tranquility, speaks more loudly than words, enabling in this case an unsaved spouse to be won over by observing your pure and reverent lives. For this reason, Peter here in this passage encourages spouses to clothe themselves with a gentle and quiet spirit. So there's something powerful in our testimony if we can have a gentle and quiet spirit. In a turbulent world, the peace of God or a quiet life is appealing. Again, so many people are walking around today with anxiety and all, mental health is a big issue in our culture. If we can focus in on having this as a priority, living a quiet and peaceful life, people are going to notice it and they're going to be drawn to it. The ironic thing is, if we want to have an attractive witness, we'll make it a mission to lead a quiet life. We're not driven by arguing and convincing, but by assuming a humble and low profile. So it does kind of go countercultural. It does kind of go counterintuitive. Maybe the best way we could be a witness is to chill out a little bit, to humble, have a little bit of a lower profile. The questions I'm going to have everybody ponder this weekend is this: do you really believe you can experience the peace of God in the midst of trial and stress? So if your answer is not a yes for that, then you need to get some resolution to that yes, when we pursue God's presence, when we pursue his peace, we can live a quiet and peaceful life regardless of our circumstances. Here's a more challenging question maybe. What unnecessary distractions and commotion do you invite into your life? So what kind of unnecessary things do you invite into your life? Can you learn to be content with less? Are you always looking for that next thing? That's culture. That's that emptiness. We're always trying to fill ourselves with something, okay? Fill that blanket with 100 different things, but something about being quiet and content, peaceful, those things all blend together. Next question is, are you ever tempted to pry into someone else's issues? No one likes to be considered themselves a gossip, but how are you interested in the lives of others? And is it always for a pure and holy reason? Or is there a little bit of your flesh wants to know what's going on? And then why? What's that about? Okay, so there's something to be said for staying in. Arlene, the last question is, how can you differentiate or separate your mission mess, your witness to the world, and a quiet life? Can you recognize that, we're supposed to live quiet and peaceful lives, but we're also supposed to be salt and light? And some of the consequences of that, the unintended consequence might be entering into a measure of conflict or having people not appreciate you or what you have to say. But can you recognize that there's a public part, but there's also the private part? And again, exemplified in Jesus, that he had conflict with people, serious conflict with the religious leaders of the day. But I still think, and I hope you believe, that Jesus still had a heart at peace and a quietness in his life, humility. All right, so that's it. There's the priority. How can we live a quiet and peaceful life in the midst of all the craziness around us? Thanks so much. Take care and God bless.